You're about to eat something today. Maybe you already have. You reached into a package, opened a container, or pulled something from a shelf that has been sitting there for weeks without rotting. You did not hunt it. You did not forage it. You did not even know its name 6 months ago. But your body, the one that has been accumulating its wisdom for 300,000 years, has opinions about what you just put inside it. And those opinions are far stranger than you think. Before there were farms, there were no farms. That sounds obvious, but the real weight of that sentence takes a moment to land. For roughly 290,000 of the 300,000 years that anatomically modern humans have existed, nobody planted anything, nobody owned land, nobody stored grain in a silo or carefully tended a herd of cattle. Every single calorie that kept your ancestors alive had to be found, chased, dug up, or pulled apart with bare hands and blunt tools. There was no backup, there was no second option. You found it or you did not eat. What did they actually find? The answer will change the way you look at your next meal. For most of the 20th century, scientists assumed the answer was simple: meat, lots of it. The image of the cave-dwelling mammoth slayer became the defining portrait of early humanity: powerful, carnivorous, built for the kill. Documentaries showed men with spears. Museums filled their dioramas with hunters dragging carcasses back to roaring fires. The diet industry eventually adopted this image wholesale, naming entire eating philosophies after it and selling it back to you as an ancient truth. But the fossil record had other ideas. In 2014, a research team led by Amanda Henry at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology examined the dental calculus, hardened fossilized plaque, found on the teeth of Neanderthals and early modern humans. Dental calculus is extraordinary in what it preserves. It captures microscopic traces of everything that ever passed between your ancestors' lips. And what Henry's team found fossilized in those ancient grooves was not just meat residue. It was starch granules, plant fibers, evidence of cooked roots, grass seeds, and date palms pressed into the enamel of people who supposedly lived only to hunt. Your ancestors were not the single-minded predators the textbooks had described. They were opportunists of the highest order. They ate what was there. And what was there was deeply, richly varied, depending on where your ancestors happened to live. And they lived everywhere, from the dense forests of Central Africa to the wind-scoured tundra edges of Europe to the coastal lagoons of Southern Asia. The menu looked completely different. A group living near the ocean had access to shellfish, seaweed, fish, shark, seal, and the occasional beached whale. A group deep in a tropical forest ate tubers, wild berries, termites, fungi, fruit bats, and the occasional small mammal. A group on open savanna hunted large game when they could and supplemented it with an enormous variety of plant foods when they could not. There was no single ancestral human diet. There was a strategy, and the strategy was this: eat everything available, waste nothing, remember where you found it, and return next season. This is not a small distinction. The strategy explains something that took scientists decades to fully appreciate: the sheer breadth of what ancient humans consumed. Researchers studying the Totkungsan of the Kalahari Desert, one of the most extensively documented forager populations in the modern era, recorded more than 100 plant species in their regular diet. Not exotic superfoods, roots, berries, melons, nuts, leaves, plants that required deep knowledge, knowing which ones were edible at which stage of growth, which needed to be cooked to remove toxins, which tasted bitter but carried essential minerals the body quietly craved. That knowledge was not instinct. It was accumulated wisdom, passed from person to person across generations, held entirely inside human memory because there was no other place to store it. And then there was fire. The paleoanthropologist Richard Wrangham spent decades arguing that The real turning point in human dietary history was not hunting, it was cooking. In his landmark 2009 book Catching Fire, Wrangham proposed that the controlled use of fire and the transformation of food it made possible was the single most important dietary shift in the entire prehistory of your species. Cooking breaks down the cell walls of plants, releasing far more calories than the same food provides when eaten raw. It neutralizes toxins, it softens meat, it turns tough, fibrous roots into soft, energy-dense fuel. Before cooking, the human gut had to do enormous work just to extract enough energy to keep a body moving. After cooking, the gut could shrink, and the brain, a calorie-hungry organ that burns roughly 20% of all energy you consume, could grow. The brain that is processing these words right now became possible, at least in part, because someone very long ago put food into a flame, but fire was only as useful as what you had to put in it. And finding that food, identifying it, harvesting it, carrying it back, preparing it, was skilled, demanding irreplaceable work. In most hunter-gatherer societies, and this is well documented across extensive anthropological fieldwork, women were the primary plant food gatherers. Not the subordinate ones, not the secondary ones, the primary ones. Across populations studied in Africa, Australia, and the Americas, plant foods made up between 50 and 80% of total daily caloric intake. Men hunted, yes, but hunting was wildly unreliable. A single hunt could fail for days. What kept a group alive through those failures was the steady, expert, almost encyclopedic knowledge held by the people who gathered, who knew which root was edible and which was poison, which berry was ripe and which would cause convulsions, which time of year a particular tree dropped its fruit in a particular valley. It was knowledge as survival. And it worked across hundreds of thousands of years without a single nutritional label. Then, around 10 to 12,000 years ago, something shifted. It happened in multiple places, seemingly independently of each other. In the Fertile Crescent, in the Yangtze River Valley, in Mesoamerica, in the highlands of New Guinea. Humans began doing something they had never systematically done before. They started planting. They observed, or simply acted on, the insight that the seeds of certain grasses, placed deliberately in soil and tended over time, would produce food predictably. That animals kept close to camp rather than hunted across open land could supply meat and milk and hides on demand. Agriculture was not a single invention. It was a slow revolution unfolding across centuries, quietly but permanently reshaping the relationship between your species and its food. And here is the part no one tells you. It made things worse, at least for the people who lived through it first. Anthropologist Mark Nathan Cohen, in his landmark 1977 study The Food Crisis in Prehistory, analyzed skeletal remains from populations on both sides of the agricultural transition, before and after farming took hold. The early farmers were shorter than their hunter-gatherer predecessors. Their bones showed clearer signs of nutritional deficiency. Iron deficiency anemia, vitamin C, and D deficiency stunted growth in children. Their teeth were far worse. A diet built around cultivated grain is a diet high in fermentable carbohydrates, and fermentable carbohydrates feed exactly the bacteria that destroy your enamel. For all the uncertainty and physical danger of life before farming, hunter-gatherers were in many measurable respects healthier than the first farmers who followed them. So, why did farming win? Because it could feed more people. Not healthier people. Not stronger people. More people. A given patch of land intensively farmed could support far more humans than the same land could support through foraging. More people meant more births. More births meant growing populations. Growing populations built villages. Villages accumulated into cities. Cities generated the surplus, the specialization, and the complex social structures that produced what we now call civilization. The nutritional compromise your ancestors made 10,000 years ago is the direct reason you are alive in the world you are living in right now. But your body never fully adjusted. Your gut microbiome, your insulin response, your cravings, your capacity for bitter flavors that modern processed food has systematically engineered out. All of it was shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of wildly varied, seasonally rotating, mostly whole food eating. The ultra-processed, sugar-dense, fiber-stripped diet that became the global default across the 20th century is, in evolutionary terms, something your biology has had approximately 30 seconds to respond to. Researcher Tim Spector, professor of genetic epidemiology at King's College London, has spent years studying exactly this gap. His team compared the gut microbiomes of people living in industrialized nations to those of the Hadza of Tanzania, one of the few remaining populations still living primarily as hunter-gatherers. The difference was stark. The Hadza had roughly 40% more microbial diversity in their guts than the average British city dweller. That diversity is not a trivial statistic. It is associated with stronger immune function, lower rates of inflammatory disease, and a more resilient digestive response. The Hadza, across a year, consumed over 600 distinct plant and animal species. The average modern Western diet is built around fewer than 20. 600 species, reduced to 20, in less than a century. Think about what was on that ancient table. Grasshoppers roasted in hot coals until the legs crisped and crumbled. Wild tubers so fibrous they would exhaust modern teeth. Bitter leaves that your current palate would immediately reject. Half-fermented fruit that had fallen from the tree and begun breaking down in afternoon heat. Organs, the liver, heart, kidney, brain, lung, eaten raw or barely warmed over fire. Bone marrow cracked from femurs with a stone and pulled out in one long draw. Fish eggs pressed against the roof of the mouth. Termites, caterpillars. Honey, when it could be found, eaten in quantities that would concern a modern physician. But it could never be found often enough to ever become a real problem. Your ancestors did not eat this way because they preferred it. They ate it because survival demanded flexibility above everything else. And out of that flexibility, out of the relentless, intelligent, adaptive response to whatever the land happened to offer, something remarkable was built. The human body became the most versatile digestive machine on Earth. You can process meat and plants with equal efficiency. You can survive the tropics or the Arctic with the same fundamental biology. You can fast for days and feast for hours. You can digest dairy if your ancestors herded cattle long enough for the gene to switch on. You can handle altitude. You can process alcohol. You can eat things that would poison almost any other primate outright. That versatility is not a flaw. It is your deepest inheritance. Amanda Henry's fossilized starch granules, Richard Wrangham's cooking hypothesis, Mark Nathan Cohen's agricultural paradox, Tim Spector's microbiome data. Across decades of research from different disciplines using different methods, the same portrait keeps developing. Ancient humans did not thrive because they found the perfect food. They thrived because they could adapt to any food. Their diet was not a plan. It was a response to a world that never stopped changing. So the next time you reach into a package, pull something from a shelf, or open a container that has sat without rotting for weeks, hold it for a moment. Your ancient ancestors would not have recognized it. They would have smelled it carefully, turned it in their hands, been confused by its total lack of season, its uniform texture, its impossible shelf life. They would have wondered what kind of world produces food that simply does not decay. You reach for it without a second thought. Because to you, it is ordinary. But your gut still remembers 600 species, and the distance between what it remembers and what you put inside it today. That distance is the strangest thing you have eaten all week. For more such insights, follow Like and subscribe the channel Facts